Nick Timothy is the Conservative MP for West Suffolk, and despite being newly minted at the last election, he's already Shadow Lord Chancellor and the Vice Chair of Conservative Friends of Israel. He rose to prominence in 2017 as the Chief of Staff to then Prime Minister Theresa May, when he was forced to resign after her general election campaign saw the party lose their majority to an insurgent Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party. The embarrassment doesn't stop there, however. We covered him last year on this very show, go heavily into bat for the supporters of Israeli football club Maccabi Tel Aviv after they were banned from tickets to their match against Aston Villa, which saw him utilise a whole slew of Islamophobic tropes and accuse the local police of, quote, conceding to the mob. But his latest escapade into the headlines is far more sinister. Here we see Sadiq Khan praying with fellow Muslims in Trafalgar Square for iftar, a harmless act of faith in a space that plenty of faith groups have used for similar purposes. Yet Nick Timothy didn't seem to think it was harmless, however, and posted this tweet that needs to be read to be believed. Too many are too polite to say this, but mass ritual prayer in public places is an act of domination. The Adhan, which declares there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, is, when called in a public place, a declaration of domination. Perform these rituals in mosques if you wish, but they are not welcome in our public places and shared institutions. And given their explicit repudiation of Christianity, they certainly do not belong in our churches and cathedrals. I am not suggesting everybody at Trafalgar Square last night is an Islamist, but the domination of public places is straight from the Islamist playbook. Trafalgar Square belongs to us all. It is a national memorial to our independence and our salvation. Last night was not like a televised football match or a St. Patrick's Day celebration. It was an act of domination and therefore division. It shouldn't happen again. Now, for someone to go from being the Chief of Staff of Theresa May, an emblematic figure of the Tory left, to being a braying Islamophobic crank must be incredibly jarring for many One Nation Conservatives. The Tories have always marketed themselves as a party prioritising free speech and personal liberty, and here's a front bencher openly calling for the restrictions of freedom to practice religion to one very specific group of people. It's a trend we're seeing from centre-right parties across the global north. A thermostatic reaction to migration policy over the last 30 years has moved their voter bases significantly rightward, meaning they've been either usurped by parties to their right or have been chasing the rhetoric of those same parties. And if we didn't need any more evidence of the reformification of the Tories, here is Reform UK leader Nigel Farage himself today echoing Timothy's sentiments.
What we witnessed on Monday in London, in the historic Trafalgar Square, in a country that was based and built on Judeo-Christian values, because that's at the bottom of everything this country's ever been. What we witnessed there was a group of people headed up by the ghastly Sadiq Khan, attempting dominance over our capital city and over our culture. And what do we get today? At Prime Minister's questions, the PM defended what happened in Trafalgar Square and said that anybody that stands out and speaks against it is a bigot. Well, I'm sorry, Prime Minister. I'm sorry, the Conservative Party that let most of these people in. We are not going to surrender everything that was built over centuries, defended at a cost of great blood in 2 world wars, for us to be a free, independent nation. We will not put up with this anymore. Simple as.
That was quite a polemic there from Nigel Farage. It is actually quite scary, I think, the way in which he was employing the rhetoric there, the talk of surrender, the talk of world wars, whilst essentially defending the restrictions of liberty. He said that we fought for liberty, and yet his position here is banning other people's liberty. What, because he's offended? Because he believes that it offends Christian values? I mean, he talks about Judeo-Christian values, but there's no such thing. There is Judaism and there is Christianity, and Islam is also an Abrahamic religion, which is part of that same kind of group. Judeo-Christian is only ever a term that's used or invoked by the right wing specifically to counter Islam, because they perceive Islam as some kind of new threat. It's really a kind of changing of rhetoric in terms of the West versus East dynamic that's been kind of historical now, ever since American unipolarity kind of came into existence. And it is this essentially division of the world between what they would perceive as the civilized West versus the Muslim East, that they have created Judeo-Christian values as their kind of religious base for the West, even though that's really not the case. The UK mostly, historically, went on Christian values, but that's kind of degraded as we've become more humanist in our approach, as we've become more secular. So you can tell that it's only being done specifically to scapegoat Muslims in particular once you hear Judeo-Christian being invoked. But it's also quite funny as well, Nick Timothy saying, well, it is somehow an act of domination because they proclaim that their God is the one true God, that like Islam will deny other religions. I think you'll find most religions do that. I think most religions believe that their true God, or that their God is the one true God. The idea that this is specific to Islam is untrue. And therefore you can see that they are singling out this group in particular. And if Nick Timothy's comments endorsement from Nigel Farage was bad enough, Timothy's also found the most damning bedfellow possible.
But I want to congratulate and thank every patriot, everyone who stood up, everyone who refused to be silenced, everyone who played their part in shifting the Overton window so far, so much, that a Conservative Member of Parliament now feels comfortable to state these facts. Now, if this would have been 12 months ago, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, no MP would have said anything like this. You know why? Because the left had the monopoly. They would have absolutely crucified him. The Conservative Party would have kicked him out. Do you know why now they can say this? Because of you. Because you took to the streets in your millions. You have given confidence to people to speak the truth and know that there's support for that truth, for that feeling, for that pride, for that courage, for all of it. It's there now. You did it. Every one of you did it. People said, what's the point in these rallies, these demonstrations? Conversations that are now being had, whether it be by this MP in the Conservative Party, and fair play and well done to him, or whether it be from Restore Britain, whether it be from Advance, whether it be from Nigel Farage, whoever it's from, these things have happened because they now have confidence, because they see it.
The scary part is he isn't wrong. The Overton window has shifted, and it's being deliberately shifted by politicians who refuse to repudiate the latent Islamophobia on the right of politics, and by billionaires who back the far right cynically to scapegoat minorities for the problems that they caused, the billionaires caused. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has let it slide so far, refusing to sack Timothy despite calls from the Prime Minister to do so in the Commons on Wednesday. The Tory chair Kevin Hollinrake has backed him too, although his defence didn't actually seem very convincing to LBC's Nick Ferrari.
I think Nick was right. I think that kind of exclusive event in a public location, which was a ticket-only event in a public place, is wrong. It's
an act of domination. They are not welcome in our public places. Why not, Mr. Chairman?
That's not to say Muslims are not welcome in our public places.
No, acts of prayer, ritual prayer. Have you attended? I don't know whether you have, but have you ever attended a papal visit when they come to this country? There's always hold these. I've attended 2. That's wrong, is it?
That's an inclusive event. We see this as being an exclusive event.
But how does it affect anyone's life? It's not like they took over the whole of Trafalgar Square. They had an area that was sectioned off so they could celebrate and pray. I thought that would be part of living in multicultural United Kingdom. Clearly, I'm wrong in the views of the Conservative Party.
Well, yeah, we're entitled to our views, Nick. I reverse the question. Why would you need to do an organised event like that, which is only a prayer event? It wasn't a performance in a public space. That's the questions Nick is asking.
Where's the tolerance gone?
That's just wrong, Nick. We completely tolerate the Muslim faith. We support the Muslim faith. All moderate Muslims we should support in this country. We support freedom of religion, freedom of speech. This is freedom of speech acting in effect today.
The absolute topsy-turvy world he must live in, to calling out someone else is engaging in a restriction on free speech for saying that Muslims should be allowed to pray. The fact that there's gone so far that the swivel-eyed loons are now running the asylum, so much so that Nick Ferrari is the one going, where's the tolerance? Clearly, them being allowed to pray is what's good about multicultural Britain. And Kevin Hollinrake giving a very kind of chopped defence of Nick Timothy's statements, something about being a ticketed event, meaning it's exclusive, therefore that is why it's bad, right? If they'd taken over all of Trafalgar Square and it wasn't ticketed, would it have been okay then, Kevin, by your own logic? None of this makes sense, but it's clear he is backtracking because of them deciding that they're not going to bother in any way coming down on Nick Timothy for his comments in the Conservative Party. Barry, this kind of Islamophobia in the Conservative Party isn't new. We've seen this before. We've seen comments, I believe it was Nusrat Ghani who said that she'd received Islamophobia within the Conservative Party. But in previous iterations of the Tories, there was at least some kind of artifice that they would come down on people who engaged in this stuff, even if it was only symbolically. What do you think has changed that's got them to this point?
First of all, I actually felt really sick watching those clips. Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage engaging in the most base Islamophobia, engaging in talk that I would deem fascistic. It was disgusting to watch those clips just now. And what Nick Timothy said is rampant, blatant, naked Islamophobia. No matter how you slice it, that's just a statement of fact. And it's been galling to watch Kemi Badenoch cycle through different excuses while defending it. First of all, he was just defending British values. Then it was, well, they shouldn't be praying in public. And it was crazy that each new excuse she came up with was still Islamophobic. And I think you're right that, there has been this history of Islamophobia in the Tory party. This is not in any way new. You have the example you just raised, but also, wasn't it in 2018 that Saida Warsi came out and said that there was a problem with Islamophobia? That's 8 years ago. At the time, Theresa May was the prime minister, and Saida Warsi had said that she was in denial about the problem and that she should publicly acknowledge it. They're not in denial about the problem now. They're leaning into Islamophobia. I think it was also interesting to watch Keir Starmer go on the attack yesterday when you look at sort of like the wider political scene in the UK, given that Labour have lost so many Muslim voters over the war in Gaza. It was interesting to see him go on the attack. Also, on Monday, there was a debate in the Commons about this new social cohesion plan that the Labour government wants to introduce. And if you look at that plan, explicitly calls out Islamophobia and stuff. So I wonder if they now see this as a fertile attack line. This is Islamophobia in the Tory party. And not that they have to use that in a cynical way. The Tory party is rampantly Islamophobic, and it's a huge problem, and it's dangerous the way that they're talking. But I think for Badenoch, look, they're not going to make any political hay off this. We've already seen that, as you say, trying to reform has not worked. It has not worked for Labour. It has not worked for the Tories. Guess what? People like the original flavour. They don't like New Coke. They like reform. And all you do is you set the table for Farage to come out and make a grandstanding speech like that. You've opened the door for reform to frame the conversation. So massive problem in the Tory party, absolutely disgusting and just not beneficial for them in any way, shape or form.
One thing I would say, Barry, what's interesting is that usually when you see racist tropes being invoked or when you see people engaging in racism, the framing is usually one with which that people treat their own race as superior. There's the treating other races or other people of different backgrounds as being inferior. What's interesting about this is the fact that, to me, it mirrors the way in which the right-wingers of old talked about Jewish people. It's not feeling superior. It's this idea of a plot, the idea of the threat. It is treating them as a subversive entity trying to undermine society. This was the way, like, when the trope about Judeo-Bolshevism, right, came up. There was this idea that there was a subversion of society happening from this particular ethnic minority. And I feel like this is the way in which they're talking about Muslims right now. I feel like the way in which they're talking about Muslims, we saw this in response to the Gorton and Denton by-election too, saying that society is being undermined and overturned by people practicing taqiyya. We hear this a lot from the right insofar as Zoran Mamdani only got elected because he was practicing taqiyya by pretending to be more liberal than he was so that he could subvert society as a Muslim, which is far different. It's a far cry from what we usually hear from these kind of racist narratives. What do you make of that comparison?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think it's one thing to say, to express racism by saying one group is better than another, but I think it's more dangerous to go down this road of saying that a group is subversive and that a group is a threat to the state. And actually, that's exactly what Nick Timothy said, isn't it, with this comment about domination, about how they're seeking to dominate. And that's not new. He is not the first person to say this. He's just echoing hard right talking points. Like, I've seen this before. I've seen this in the UK. We've seen this in the US. In Ireland, where I come from, we have a growing problem with the far right. And I've seen them say the same thing when there are Eid prayers held in public in Dublin. The Irish far right has come out and said they're trying to dominate us. This is an act of domination. And it's definitely, I think, an advance on the Islamophobia that we've seen from the right in this country before, and the Islamophobia that we've seen from the Conservative Party before, this use of the word domination and this contention that the Muslim population is somehow a threat to the state. And yes, it's way more dangerous than the kind of talk that we've seen before. And again, reflective of this movement of the Overton window, in which you can attack an entire community like this. And like you say, with the Gorton and Denton by-election, even, imply that there was some kind of fraud perpetrated by the Muslim community. And, there was talk that they had imported this practice from elsewhere. And, as if the Muslim community in Gorton and Denton are not really British. And, when you go down that road, and one of the most mainstream parties in the country, the Tory party, one of the two, parties of government are going down that road, then I don't think it's hysterical to say we're looking down the barrel of fascism with this stuff.